All right. Hello and welcome everyone to Leading in a New Reality. I'm Elizabeth Fitzsimons, Vice President of Leadership and Engagement at LEAD San Diego. At LEAD, it's our mission to connect, educate, and empower leaders for positive change. And we do that through professional and leadership development, board matching, and working with local nonprofits on projects that serve the community. We are currently recruiting for two programs. Advance, which is our professional development program for women that we launched to address the gender gap in the C-suite and in boardrooms, and Influence, our leadership program that informs, equips, and connects CEOs and senior executives for maximum impact. For information on those programs and everything that LEAD is up to, please visit sdchamber.org/lead. The Leading in a New Reality is produced in partnership with Jones, a company whose mission is to develop leaders and human systems that counter oppression through diversity, inclusion, and organizational effectiveness. Our intention for this webinar is to help you all understand what's going on in our ever-changing world, and also to inspire you and empower you as leaders of teams and leaders of families. This webinar is being recorded and also live streamed by our friends over at 10 News, both on their website and their Facebook page. Thank you, 10 News team. We'll take questions from our viewers, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to take questions from Facebook too. Kim Wynn, my colleague and lead program manager, is going to be looking for those questions. Thank you, Kim. Today's topic is the impact of the pandemic on women in the workforce. We've been in this now for a year. It's now March, it's hard to believe. Since last year, when schools closed, many businesses went to remote working, and our country, for the most part, went into lockdown. And professional women, especially mothers, have shouldered much of the burden. We're talking about loss of childcare, the addition of distance learning, and that's all while still holding down full-time jobs that have not slowed down. Since last year, nearly 3 million women in America have dropped out of the labor force, which is just such a massive loss that really shines light on pay gaps, undervalued work, and how we as a society really look at caregiving responsibilities. And lately, you've probably noticed that there has been increased attention on this trend, and also increased attention on the intense burnout that women are experiencing. So we're going to talk about that today, what's happening and how we can all be part of the solution. Our three guests with us today each have a front row seat to this phenomenon and are working to address it in their own ways. And it's my pleasure to introduce them to you now. Denise Garcia is Chief of Staff for County Supervisor Nora Vargas. Ms. Garcia was born in Tijuana and raised in San Diego. And growing up in a dynamic border town had a really strong influence on her desire to pursue a career in government and international relations. Through her work and civic commitments, she became passionate about binational issues and Latino business community empowerment. Before joining the Office of Supervisor Vargas, Ms. Garcia served as Director of International Affairs and Deputy Director of the Department of Government Affairs for San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer. Her portfolio included U.S.-Mexico relations, international affairs, and immigration policy. She previously served as Director of Community Outreach and Economic Development for San Diego Councilman Mark Kersey, helping to establish a new binational focus for his office. And prior to that, she worked in the office of San Diego Mayor Jerry Sanders as Director of Boards and Commissions and Protocol Binational Affairs. She earned her master's degree in public administration as a National Urban Fellow at the City College of New York. And she serves on several boards locally, including the Red Cross and the New Americans Museum. She is a graduate of LEAD San Diego's Impact Program and the Advanced Program. Welcome, Denise Garcia.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Great to have you here. Roxanne Kimani is a life transformation strategist and owner of Kimani Catalyst Consulting, a coaching and consulting business dedicated to helping individuals, communities, and organizations in creating a more just and equitable society. Dr. Kimani offers inclusive practice frameworks that bridge communities across racial, economic, religious, and cultural divides. She engages her clients in diversity, equity, and inclusion work using an identity construction lens that allows people to connect to who they are and how they show up in the world as the entry point for understanding the external systems in their community that creates the internal realities that many people experience daily. In addition to her consulting, Dr. Kimani serves as a faculty coach and leadership development consultant with Rise San Diego, a nonprofit focused on elevating and advancing urban leadership with a social justice lens. She earned a Doctor of Philosophy and Leadership Studies with an emphasis in human development from the University of San Diego and is a certified life executive coach through Accomplishment Coaching. Dr. Kimani served on the board of the Tariq Kamisa Foundation and serves as the chair of the Board Development Committee and Programs Committee. She is a member of the San Diego Union Tribune Advisory Board and a 2020 graduate of our advanced program. Welcome, Roxanne Kimani.
Thank you so much. Very excited to participate in this conversation.
Thank you. All right, our third guest is Roxana Popescu. She's a reporter, writer, and writing teacher whose current work focuses on two areas: international luxury real estate on one end, and the pandemic's impacts on vulnerable San Diegans. Since 2015, Dr. Popescu has written for the New York Times House Hunting In series, profiling a different residential market every month. Since 2010, she has contributed to iNewsSource, a San Diego nonpartisan nonprofit investigative news outlet, where she is committed to bringing to the foreground the voices and experiences of marginalized people who might not typically be documented in the news. Dr. Popescu is an adjunct professor at the University of San Diego and serves businesses and nonprofits with copywriting, content marketing, and training. She has been an advocate for professional women since 2008. It started with her blog, The Daily Asker, a year-long experiment in asking, wage negotiation, and self-advocacy through a lens of gender difference. She is currently working on a book about burnout and time debt among parents. She recently created a Facebook page group focused on burnout, which has become a place for discussion, connection, and support for women experiencing the full range of experiences of pandemic life with or without children. She earned her PhD in comparative literature from Harvard, and she lives in the community of City Heights with her husband and two kids, very close to where she grew up. Welcome, Roxana Popescu.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. All right, so let's start with if you could share your observations about what's happening right now. You each have such distinct specialties and constituencies. Ms. Garcia, you're navigating the political and policy world. Dr. Kimani, you're deep into the work of helping and coaching individuals and organizations. Dr. Popescu, you're a journalist and tracker of themes and trends and ideas. I'd love to know what you're noticing in this moment, and perhaps we could start with you, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, I want to start off with a year ago. You talked about it, right? It's almost it is a year ago. Who would have ever thought we would still be living in a pandemic? I sure didn't. And a year ago, we entered a new reality through this and really figured out what this global pandemic really means. The world kind of came to a screeching halt. It came to a screeching halt for me. I remember vividly when I got a call from my son's school, and it was a Friday saying that his school was going to be closed. And we were trying to figure out whether or not at that time I was at the mayor's office at the city of San Diego, trying to figure out, what does this all mean? I have aging parents, 74 and 85, that helped me with my son, which gave me the luxury to be able to work longer days than normal, your normal 9 to 5. And all of a sudden that was gone. That support system that I had was no longer available. And it was trying to figure out, how do you manage working from home, which we've never done before, at least a lot of us never did, and also take care of your children at home, and navigating all of this and trying to figure it out of a never-ending cycle of working. And also adding to that is all the guilt that comes along with trying to be a great employee and also a great mom, and feeling guilty over putting your son to watch too much TV or because he's not eating healthy enough. schools were closed and the work continued. And I really feel that I was one of the lucky ones. I really did have a luxury of being home with my son, and not so many women, especially women in the district that I represent the supervisor in, don't have that. A lot of the women in our district are essential workers, and we had to figure out what to do with our children. So what am I seeing? I'm seeing a system that really hasn't worked for us, especially for working mothers, for our families, where we have unbalanced workloads, overworked and underappreciated moms trying to hold it together. And so that is what I'm seeing now with myself, and also with so many friends and women around me, and also and the women that are in my district as well.
Thank you. Dr. Kimani, what are you noticing?
In addition to what Denise just shared, I think the complexity in all of this is, also recognizing that women have always been doing a lot even before the pandemic. And so this has just added even more layers to the complexity of what it means to be a working mom, what it means to be the caretaker, while also holding down a career. And so what I've witnessed in working with a lot of my clients is trying to hold it all together, though they already know that they're falling apart. And we are working in a society where they're like, yes, remote working is great and it's a lot more flexible, but is it really more flexible? Are we shifting the way that we look at the workday? The expectation that what I notice is a lot of women are becoming the school teachers, the school counselors, the principals, the coaches, the mediators if they have more than one kid, at the same time that they're trying to attend every single Zoom meeting, look presentable, because that is the other piece that I've noticed as well, is now every single meeting has become a Zoom meeting. Somehow we forgot that phones exist. And so that adds a whole other thing, is making sure that what it looks like back here looks good. And kids are running back and forth behind, and the apologies, people feel like they have to apologize if their child is behind them, or their dog's like, that would be me. But all of that is a balancing act, in addition to when you could just go to work from 9 to 5 or whatever your shift was, and you knew that your kid was at school doing what they needed to do. Now, not only are you balancing the work day at the same time as your school day, there's all of the other stuff that comes in, from making sure your kids have food, making sure that you have eaten. And now, as you were talking about a year later, I remember early on in the pandemic, we were all having happy hours, having those fun little, let's get on Zoom, let's get on some of the apps and connect with friends that we haven't seen in a while. Everybody is zoomed out. People do not want to do more things on, and yet that is really the only way that we can try to stay in contact. So I think there's so many layers to what women are experiencing, that some of it was felt pre-pandemic, but now it is just emphasized and felt so much more deeply, particularly when we don't really have an end in sight.
Right. I was thinking this morning about just how remarkable I think women are in adapting to things, but how long is that adaptation sustainable? And also that blurring of the boundaries that you mentioned. Denise, I'm going to call you out because I got an email from you in the timestamp was 12:01, but I can't really point at you because I was reading it before 5 a.m.
That's true.
So,
very true. We are working all day long, to Dr. Roxanne Kimani's point. We really are. The lines are blurred now. And where are the boundaries? Yeah.
Well, there's an expectation now that you're home, you can respond, you can take day or have a day off. Your phone is right there, your computer is right there. So you're clearly not out because we're in a shutdown. So respond to the email.
Right. Dr. Popesky, what are you noticing right now?
Yeah, well, absolutely. This question of kind of pandemic fatigue. I mean, a year into it, it feels both like, in a way, maybe only yesterday we were just at the beginning of lockdown, and yet it feels like a decade. I mean, it's like the multiple eons of the pandemic, the saga, the early years, the mid years, the recent years. Wait, it's only been 12 months, or more than 12 globally. But yeah, and so, but when you layer that feeling of just that marathon exhaustion feeling on top of the long-term structural challenges that women have been up against, in the workforce, things that Roxanne mentioned, and also Denise, it's the sense, I think, of how are we still having these conversations? Why are we really still asking ourselves, are we still really up against these questions? And of course, we're making progress, the vaccine, I mean, there's sort of it's clearly a light at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully some of this pressure will be alleviated, school will open up again. But I wonder if there's also something else kind of in the air, just in the conversations that I'm seeing about recognizing the potential for this to be transformative. Like, can we use this as a chance to rethink? Like, we're having this conversation now. Thank you to everybody who's here asking and caring about this subject. That's phenomenal. So from that earlier pandemic era of, this is awful, and this is, or from the Zoom happy hours to maybe the mid-level, mid-year, mid-era of like exhaustion and just the grind, to now I wonder if we're thinking, can we turn this into something productive? And so maybe that's part of this conversation and other conversations that I'm seeing just in the news and Facebook groups and just around.
That's a good point. What does the burnout lead to, right? What is the exhaustion? The exhaustion can only, we're running on these empty tanks. And so what comes next? Go ahead, Dr. Kimani.
I think what you're saying, it speaks to the need for a culture shift, right? That what we have experienced without choice in the last year was a culture shift that we were building as each day passed because we didn't know what to expect. And so there's this idea that we should all be resilient. We should be able to bounce back when things get back to normal. But that doesn't exist because what has happened in the last year is the new normal. And so we have to create a culture shift that responds to it from that perspective, not just reacting and hoping that we can go backwards. We need to no longer just focus on valuing productivity above sanity, for one thing, and really just trying to hold both the need for people to feel good about being in the family and taking care of their family at the same time that they're also getting the work done. And that it's not so much about the hours that we're spending, which is now went from the typical 40 exempt hours to the 100 hours or whatever, but that things will get done and to support our people in getting to that place.
I absolutely agree. I always try to look at the positive, or what's the learning lesson on this. And to Dr. Popescu's point, is the silver lining is that we've already been doing this. Women have always taken more than we should, or more than we can handle, but we do it anyway. We do it with resilience. But what's the silver lining in this is, how do we change that? And it's brought this to light, and people are paying attention. So how do we keep the momentum going on how to make workplaces work for all families, not just women, all families in general? And how do we change that to help employers see the value of hybrid schedules or flexible schedules? And how do we as women empower ourselves to do better for ourselves, which in turn helps our families?
And I think as we look to these solutions and, also maybe ask causes, how do we end up here? I think it would be important to not blame the pandemic. It's not just the pandemic. These things have been going on much longer. It's structural, it is generational. So it's just important to keep that in mind as we look for solutions and accountability and causes, the real root causes of this, the unsustainable patterns that we've gotten ourselves into, both as individuals, the pressures that we as women place on ourselves, the things that are asked of us within the family unit, and in the workplace.
So the pandemic as a reckoning, right?
Pay equity, all of that, right? Moment of reckoning. That's right.
Mm-hmm. It's a huge spotlight. It's a huge flashlight on what you're saying of this being an issue. I mean, I know many women in my family, many of my friends who have pre-pandemic would have sick kids. They were the ones that would stay home. It was just the automatic assumption. And so now that a lot of that stuff still exists, but now the women are already home, while now they are still expected to work. So a lot of the ways that we look at our culture, the way that we understand it, has to shift. It really.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that number I mentioned earlier, the 3 million women the 3 million American women who have left the workforce over the last year. I mean, what does that mean for organizations? What does that mean for families? What is sort of collectively being lost with that kind of loss of women in the workforce? Maybe we can start with you, Dr. Kimani.
Absolutely. I know within that, a lot of the jobs that have been lost within the service industries, occupations that are typically filled with women, predominantly women of color. And so not only are those jobs lost within those areas, but a lot of women have been forced to leave the workforce just by virtue of the expectation that they have to be the ones that are at home. I think what does this mean for families? I'll start with, what does this mean for women in general? We've made huge strides in the last few years, this last decade, of pushing women into more powerful positions, really recognizing women's worth, really trying hard to close the pay equity gap that still very much exists. Let's not forget that. Women are still paid less than men, and then women of color are paid even less. And then if you add on being a working mom, you're paid less. So all of the strides and work that we have had to try to close that, we're taking a lot of steps backwards in that regard. Why? Because women are no longer in the workforce to make that argument. And that's one area of it. I think the other piece to this as well is we're losing the diversity of the voices within the organization. What women do represent, what do they bring? Women are caregivers, so we still show that piece in our workplace as well. But what are the different pieces about who we are and what we collectively bring forward is going to get lost. And that's something that is going to be very much, I would argue, more difficult for us to get back because of how easy it is for us to fall back into these antiquated ways of thinking and being, where the expectation, the unconscious expectation, is for women to be at home, to be the caregivers, to be the one that is representing all things household related. I think organizations need to take a deep, hard look at how they are supporting their current employees, speak to the employees before they get to the place of the willingness to leave or having to get to that place. Take a look at how you are paying women. I know several organizations claim to already be doing deeper looks, through their HR departments. I am not sure that's always the truth. I think that a lot of that can be talk that is just said, but then there's not really any action that backs it up. And now when we're looking at where families are, money is needed, salaries are needed, healthcare is needed, childcare is needed. If you are an organization that has space, create opportunities for childcare to be a part of that organization. What we are losing is going to have a significant impact that isn't just going to end when we think the pandemic is going to end and then we're just, again, going to be able to go back to normal. We're going to feel this for many, many years to come if we don't start taking a deeper look at how to solve some of these issues.
We know the business case too for having diverse and gender balanced leadership in companies and organizations. Those organizations are more nimble, they're more adaptive, innovative, and they perform better financially. So perhaps if there are, losses financially or in other ways, that might spur some changes. I don't know. What do you think, Denise? What is being lost here?
Dr. Kimani mentioned it. There's also the loss of two-income households, career losses, setbacks, promotions, right? Yeah, you can't really step in, lead, when you have to kind of take a little bit of a step back, know that you're not going to be able to give your organization, your company, what they require in order to move into that higher job, into that promotion, into that more of a leadership role, because you have more responsibilities at home and you have to find a way to balance that. All of that is something that I saw happening at the beginning of the pandemic. Some of my colleagues that had to slow down a little when they were on their career path to success, to the leadership role, I saw that there was a slowdown because now, and I saw how others moved up. That was because either for whatever reason, whether there's no children involved or the responsibilities are different. And that is a reality that it's going to take time to catch back up, or do we want to? And that's also where I feel that this pandemic has given me in particular is perspective, right? What are your priorities? What values do you have, and what matters in your life? And that's part of how maybe we move forward into this new paradigm of work-life balance.
Thank you, Denise. Roxana.
Yeah, thanks. So a couple of thoughts building on what you both said. So one is this, the question of what's next. And, the women who have been out of the workforce for these months, especially those who maybe lost their job early on, in the very hard hit sectors of childcare, service industry, hospitality, et cetera, when they try to reapply for jobs, they're going to have a long gap on their resumes. So again, that's going to really hit them. They're going to be applying from a position of little bargaining power, and the private sector sort of leverage that in a way that will continue this exacerbate the disadvantages, basically, over the long term. I mean, it's similar to, I think, what Denise was saying. I was also thinking of another twist on the she session, which is the mom session. The she session is not my phrase, and mom session sounds terrible, but I'm just gonna do it. Mom session, which is mothers who are opting out of motherhood, basically the falling birth rate. So in December, there was nationwide, it was 7% drop year over year in the number of births. And so I think what we're seeing is that with women being forced to leave the workforce and choosing to not have families, choosing to not have children, of course, there's a double edge there of more choice, of the ability to control, reproductive options, et cetera. So it's complex. But still, we're seeing that we're literally asking women to choose between their jobs and their families. I mean, it's very clear. It could not be more clear. It's like you either work and then you choose that and you choose to not have children, or if you have children, you have to leave your job. And I'm, like in the 1950s, not 2020. So that's that pain point.
Can you tell us about your Facebook group, QD85? First, can you explain why you named it, what it means, and why you created this group and what its purpose is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So QD85 is the ICD-11 code. That's the International Classification of Diseases code from WHO for a phenomenon for burnout, occupational burnout. And I chose the name because I wanted to allude to burnout. So the code is for people, the group is for people who I describe it, wish they had an extra arm or six, like the octopus character, just have too much on our plates, just too much is going on, whether or not we are burned out. There's clinical definition of burnout. We also use burnout, colloquially, casually. So, self-identify as just having much is going on. But I didn't want to have a title for the group, the burnt out women of Facebook or something. So just something a little bit more opaque, a little veil of privacy, and it is a private group. You're all welcome to join. I mean, anybody.
Sorry, I just blew your cover.
No, it's the secret society of no. It's so QD85 on Facebook. Letter Q, letter D, and then the number 85, and came about because I've been thinking more critically about burnout and this concept of time debt. People who are time affluent have a lot of time on their hands, and people who are constantly behind and basically experiencing time fines, time thieves. I mean, not investing their time well, just treating time like that kind of different a commodity that you can do things like you might do with money. And so I just started, again, early steps of a book research, and I wanted to create a space where we could talk about these subjects and look at burnout both as an experience and just connect, but also to look at it structurally. We post articles there, we troubleshoot, we talk about solutions. I crowdsourced some topics for our panel there, so that kind of thing.
Yeah, your first image was Firestorm.
That's
the
right.
First cover image.
Yes. So the Firestorm and
Is that how you were feeling at the moment when you set up the group?
It was two beautiful fawns or deers just caught in silhouette with a huge forest fire raging, and somebody said, could we not be greeted by this incredibly depressing, terrifying picture every time we log into your to this page? So now what's the cover? Do you like the new cover image more?
Yes.
Yeah. You should all just go check it out, though I won't say what it is.
Okay. What have you learned from the members of this group? And I'm kind of creeping towards something that we were talking about last week as a group, and that's about women's willingness to express their frustration and rage publicly or within this group.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I'm seeing just a hunger for just to have their, to speak, to discuss this, to connect. I mean, you post one picture and people immediately like it and comment on it. There's just a need, there's an unmet need there for that. Certainly there are other groups about burnout and about exhaustion and, you know, on and off Facebook. It's not far from unique, but just even in a small little corner of the internet, there's people who are interested in just wanting to. And what I noticed is that there's two, kind of did a little, I'll say A/B testing, where I would take one article, post it on my main Facebook page with, you know, however many hundreds of people, all sorts of backgrounds and identities and, you know, working, not working, et cetera, for ages. And maybe one person will comment it, will acknowledge it or like it, or, you know, not much there. Put it in the other group and it's just a vibrant conversation about it. So why are we seeking refuge, or, you know, why do we need a safe space to talk about burnout? I mean, certainly there's a stigma about it. I think it's, you know, again, being seen as possibly burnt out. I'm comfortable to say, hey, like, this is something I'm thinking about, I'm very interested in. Will that affect how people view me professionally? I mean, maybe there's a price to pay, but I'm willing to take that hit in order to help others and to just advance this conversation. But yeah, I think there's both a desire to talk about it, a need, but it's also it's not normalized. It's so similar to many other stigmatized topics. We just are doing it in a more safe space for now. And interestingly, the chairman of the Fed came out and said recently, oh, could the situation, what is it? I'm trying to remember if it was the she session, he had some kind of a causal link between the lack of childcare and the economy. And, you know, a lot of people in that circle were saying, you think, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but for the chairman of the Fed to say that was itself
Right.
a thing.
What about getting more to that expression of the rage and anger? And let's talk about the expectations that are there, right? The expectations of sort of handling it all and being the like superwoman. We talked about that a little bit last week. Denise is not, yes.
I'm nodding because I was going to jump in and talk about, I did check out your Facebook group page and I really liked it last night. So thank you for allowing me to join your private group. And we did talk about it last week when we met prior to having our official panel, and that superwoman feeling and the feeling of always having to have it all held together. That is even more exhausting than the actual work that we're doing, in my case, at least. And the opportunity. So what I also realize is what we need as women is creating these support systems, whether they're formal or informal, to help each other get through it. And that's why Facebook groups like yours, Dr. Popescu, they're so important, because you can connect. And you can connect with other people that are going through similar things that you're going through, and you don't feel alone. And then you feel like you can let your guard down, right? Because a lot of times, yes, last week I talked about you're on a Zoom call, and I'm in the office today, but I was at home when I was on the Zoom call, and I have my 4-year-old walking behind me, and I have to pretend like I have it together on the Zoom call, and I'm professional and looking straight at Zoom while I have him and I'm trying to push away. And that's a lot of angst and anxiety that I feel that we should just normalize the fact that we have lives at home. And
yeah, no, completely. I think about that, your point to the solitude and the isolation. I mean, I think that's insidious because it makes us feel like there's something wrong with the way we're doing things.
Right.
We're being, with the way things are done, or we're being asked to do them. Right. It's nothing. The fact that your son is behind you, it's like, it's a pandemic. Of course, it's going to be at home with you. You know, I mean, it's like completely just logical.
But I remember that feeling of he's not supposed to be doing that. And there's like guilt that comes with it, or just angst. It's something that was really did stay with me, of why is it that we feel that way? Why is it that I feel that? And that's working through that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's just be real. The expectation is that, again, women are supposed to have it all together. Your makeup is supposed to be perfect. Your hair is supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to look great. Everything is supposed to be organized. You are supposed to be put together. You are socially constructed to believe that all of the time. And so even in this conversation, people can tell you all the time, no, it's totally okay, but there is still going to be an implicit judgment that is going to happen. And we all kind of collude in it in some way, shape, or form, because we already have set the expectation that your video has to be on for Zooms.
Right.
And so you're already invading people's privacy in their own home. People who probably, I know many people who did not want to do that and kind of don't have a choice, because now we have just, without having kind of any informed consent process, just letting everybody in or trying to use a virtual background. We are trying to normalize things that we haven't really asked people if they're okay with, and then creating the opportunity for people to say, no, I'm not, I don't have it all together, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. Particularly women of color, and I can speak as a Black woman, I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not allowed to show that, because then I'm considered aggressive or abrasive and all of these other stereotypes that come along with it. And so that adds this other complexity of what it means to be put together, what it means in how we are trying to show up. I am not a mom. So, you know, I give it up to all of you for all of the things that you are dealing with, also as essential workers in its own way, right? Because you're taking on even more and expected to keep it together all of the time. And all of the time is now 24/7. It's no longer just the work day.
Ms. Garcia, I wanted to ask you about whether there are solutions from a policy perspective.
I definitely think that there are some solutions that are very, they're systematic solutions that need to happen throughout our country. Creating a robust childcare infrastructure, I think first and foremost is most important, because as we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, we have essential workers that need to go to work. And what do you do with your children? Schools were closed, and childcare is expensive. So affordable childcare is definitely at the top of the list of what the needs are. Ensuring fair and equal wages and quality benefits, and creating strong workplace protections are three of the top policy issues that I think really need to happen at a local, state, and federal level in order to support our families and our women.
I'll just read that note from Dr. Kimani to everyone. Census data reveals the average price of childcare for 2 young children in the San Diego region consumes 40% of the budget for a typical family of 4. I mean, it's just incredible.
And that, I mean, that's important for us to recognize that that's pre-pandemic stuff, right? That's women staying home from after they've had a baby because they couldn't afford to go back to work, because their entire paycheck going directly to that. So you might as well just stay home and raise your own children if that's the case. But who ends up doing that? More often than not, it's the woman.
On this childcare matter, so before our this webinar, I crowdsourced an answer to this question: what's one actionable thing employers should do to address the pandemic's adverse impacts on professional women? And I posted the answers from 2 Facebook groups I'm in. There's another one of academic women, Akamamas on Facebook, and then the QD85 group. So if anybody wants to go see the answers from these both researchers and women being impacted, you can go, just got a custom domain was available. So go to dothisnow.us, dothisnow.us. And the very top thing, the most popular answer, most kind of highly upvoted on Facebook, was childcare. Lobby their elected representative for free preschool. So much of the current problems is because access to childcare is so expensive. Direct quote.
I love that. Thank you, Dr. Papascu. We'll be sure to, thanks Kim for putting that in the chat. We've got a couple questions from our folks on Zoom here, from Andrea Caldwell. She says, everything I've heard is resonating so much. I'm wondering if any of these ladies have tips for putting down technology. Don't ask me. I find myself checking email first thing in the morning, literally in bed still, and again right before I go to bed. Any tips on learning to put the phone down? How do we create some space for ourselves? We'll ask the coach first, Dr. Kimani.
First and foremost, before I even get into the concept of tips of how to stop doing something, have some grace and compassion for yourself in what you are dealing with. I mean, simple as that. We judge ourselves so harshly in all of the decisions that we are making day in and day out, that adding just one more thing to it can be that, one last piece that completely breaks you. So first and foremost, have some grace and compassion that if you need your phone, you want to check out for a little bit, you want to go on social media, don't judge yourself for doing that. Yeah. What I do recommend, if you really are wanting to take that step back, is don't have your phone next to you when you go to sleep. Put it in another room. Remember these old archaic things we called alarm clocks that we used to have next to us that would just buzz or play the radio? It's okay to have those. You can bring those back. They still exist, but just let go of the phone. Because it can be that we start to develop an unconscious way of the immediate reaction to it. Mm-hmm. I won't ask any of these ladies to put themselves on the spot, but I would imagine that you've had your phone in your hand and you're like, I've spent too much on Facebook, and you close the app, and not 10 seconds later, you open it up again and you don't even realize that you've done it. We have started to create unconscious habits of doing these kinds of things. And so it's really just about practicing conscious ways of being around that technology. And if you happen to fail at it one of those days, just laugh it off, have some grace for yourself, and then just try again. But consider just putting the phone in another room. I don't like this new thing on the Apple where it tells you how much time you've spent. I think it's rude. I think it's as
shaming. It's shaming.
Judging, shaming. It's like Netflix going, are you still watching? Yes, watching. Okay, you made it available. You made all the seasons available. Why wouldn't I? We're in a pandemic. Stop judging.
What do you think about turning off notifications? Like I turn off notifications on my phone. Do you think I just did that for myself? I don't know if that's like a best practice, but just to not be constantly pinged and alerted. Is that something that you recommend?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I hate the little icon that tells them how many.
I hate that.
My mom, hopefully she's not listening. I think hers is up to 35,693. And it's also because when she emails out, she CCs herself on everything. Absolutely turn off the notifications, but not just on your phone. Do it on Outlook. Mm-hmm. Everybody has their mail available to them. You can set a schedule that I'm only going to look at my email, at a particular part of the day, whether it's like 10 minutes of each hour, or I'm going to only look at it at the beginning of the day and then at the end of the day. You have the power to create what works best for you. Again, we have to start to resist the normalization of being accessible all of the time. And those pings and those notifications are useless. They don't help serve you, because more often than not, it's not an emergency. I repeat, it's not an emergency. People don't need you that quickly. And if they do, chances are they're not emailing you about it. They'll find a way to get a hold of you. But really, it is just about having some grace and compassion, because we're all trying to figure this out together. Resiliency looks different for everybody. And if something is working that is helping you bring some calmness, then just let it be.
I wonder if, there could also be what you're saying for us to, try to create that barrier, that healthy, sort of, no, I'm not going to check my email. I'm not going to respond to you. And, that being tethered to the phone, but from the point of view of our employers or the teams we're on, maybe acknowledging or trying to have that conversation about what's expected, like, are they looking for results? Are they looking for a process? What's being measured? Is it, how many minutes we are on Slack or whatever tools we have versus did we get the job done? And how important, synchronous versus asynchronous interaction is to the task that we're performing. I think that some of that conversation would be useful for a lot of just in various professional contexts where I think maybe I wonder if, employers are kind of measuring the wrong thing. It's like sort of the performance review versus the results review. I'm just reading the language closely here. That's kind of what I do, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
There's also it's a good thing just, I think, to have this conversation with your team and your supervisors too, to get really clear on what the expectations are and what your availability is and what your capability is and your capacity is at certain times of day. At the beginning of the pandemic, I've got 3 kids and 2 of them are twins, and they were doing first grade on distance learning. And it was impossible to attend any Zoom meetings during the time that they were trying to focus on their class. And so I had to have have a conversation with my team and my boss and said, look, I can answer emails and stuff, but like I cannot be focused on a Zoom during this time when I have to be helping them. So I think it's really just, it's good to just be in those conversations and just be very candid about what you can and cannot do if you have that good trusting relationship with your colleagues.
Well, you bring up a good point, Elizabeth. It's leaders need to set the example by creating the opportunities for their staff to bring that information forward, and not setting the expectation that, well, if they needed more time, they would have said something.
Right.
We don't have that in our psyche, and that's very rarely in an organizational culture. And now that all of us are at home, we're not all on the same schedules. Lunchtime schedules are different, nap time schedules. It used to have recess. You know, that still is a thing that kids need. And who's responsible for that now? It's the parents. And so all of those kinds of things need to be taken into consideration. So taking a look at what is the normal time, or what is the reasonable time for meetings to be held. Do they all have to be on Zoom? Like you said, can they be email? Can they be on a different chat function? All of those pieces matter. The other thing that I would encourage people to consider too, for those of you who like to work late at night, be okay with just leaving the email in draft mode, because it also is then creating the expectation that other people are going to then need to work late because you're working late. And it just creates this really terrible butterfly effect. And so I know, Elizabeth, you said you sent emails at 10 o'clock.
It was me. It was me, and it was midnight last night. But I am taking what both of you, Dr. Kimani and Dr. Popescu, are sharing with our viewers, and also part of it is being okay with doing that if that's what gives me sanity. Like you said, being graceful. I feel good that I can clear out some emails late at night because my son's asleep, and that's just the time that works. And because we are in this interesting time, that helps me have a successful and productive day the next day. And so that sets me up, and I'm okay with that. Although I do turn off the notifications on social media, and when I go to bed, I do put it on airplane mode, or I turn the sound off. And that definitely allows you to have a good night's sleep and wake up refreshed the next day and feeling at least you've gotten ahead. So whatever, everyone's system is different, and what works for me might not work for others. But I think that whatever, you should feel comfortable with what's working for you. And exactly like you said, being graceful and being compassionate with yourself first and foremost is really what's going to help all of us get through it.
How are we creating that space? And this might be a good follow-up for you, Denise, and also Roxanne, what you were saying about how do we create that space as leaders of teams and organizations so that our team members feel good and comfortable about speaking up and saying, this schedule doesn't work for me, these meetings aren't working for me, can we do less of Zoom? You know what I mean? Like how can you give our viewers some tips on creating that space for the teams?
Denise?
Oh, okay. I was like, so what I'm trying to do is having that open line of communication and trying to and again, I will use my current role now, where we do have a team that I'm helping manage under the supervisor's leadership, and getting those boundaries and having those open flows of communication and sharing. Okay, is this working for you? Okay, if it's not, how can we adjust? Just allowing people to feel comfortable to speak up and to say something, and then figuring out ways to have solutions or to modify things is how I'm navigating this new role of mine.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think, and this kind of speaks to the other question in there about updating company employee handbooks. I think, as you said, we realize that flex schedule is working, that the remote work is happening, and people are still getting their work done. So I think many organizations have to recognize that this still needs to continue to help with the sanity of your employees, that you cannot just focus on the work productivity. The expectation that if you are seated in front of your computer, then that obviously means that you are working, but if you are away, that you're not. That's not always what it means. That's one piece about it. to Denise's point too, is I think leading by example too, is sharing what is working for you and what isn't working, and then letting people follow, because they may hesitate in sharing that if they think you're all gung-ho and this is how you want to continue forward. So really trying to create the equal playing field, or setting the space that is safe enough or brave enough for people to share their real truth matters. I think it's also important, and I think you brought this up, Roxana, around the performance review, or there was another word that you used, but I know for many organizations, that cycle is starting now. The information, a lot of the questions that get filled out in there are going to be fairly useless, because they're all represented when you are in when you are in an organization, a brick and mortar building, that kind of thing. So really try to shift the way that we think about reviewing people's performance, and recognize that, again, we are all in a pandemic. We don't know when it's going to end. And even if it does, who we are collectively is going to continue to shift. So we're not going back, and organizations have to figure it out using their employees and what the information that they're pulling from them, in order to create change in their policies and procedures, so that the business that they are trying to run, or the success that they want to have with their clients elsewhere, continue to be successful. Because the reality is, organizations are nothing without their employees. And if their employees are dissatisfied and unmotivated, the work product is going to be terrible.
One metaphor, kind of phrase I've used just for myself this year, is that this feeling that I'm running. This is it's like related to what you just said, Roxanne. I feel like this idea of running a marathon with weights on, and at one point the weights are going to come off, and then I'm going to be able to fly or soar. It will just be a lot easier, less resistance. But from the point of view of team leaders, so I don't lead any, I teach, I guess, but I'm on teams, being led by supervisor. But I'm thinking, if they would keep in mind when it comes time to our evaluations, that whatever was produced with weights on. I produced running. I'm not walking. I'm like swimming through this very viscous material with bunch of like I said, equal weights. So I move like 3 feet forward. Well, yeah, of course I did. But imagine if next year am I going to 30 feet forward. I mean, so just keep that in mind. The handicap, basically, like in golf, or I'm totally mixing metaphors, but just just be aware that maybe your own standards might backfire. You might lose somebody really awesome, somebody very dedicated, somebody extremely capable, flexible, adaptable. The skills that maybe you value on your team, but because the numbers didn't go up as much as you wanted, or maybe et cetera, whatever your metrics are, you're going to penalize that person, lose that person. So is that good for you? Is that good for your organization?
We have a question from, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to handle this one pretty quickly before we close. It's from Corrine Brindley from SeaWorld. She asks, what sort of positive work habits or actions resulting from COVID do you think should stick around after the crisis passes and we go back to normal?
Leggings.
Yes.
Just being comfortable in what you're wearing. Simple as that. I'll speak for myself. I have a closet full of high heels. I tried to put them on halfway through and almost fell over. So I think just finding different ways to show up and recognize that not everything requires heels for women, suits, nylons, suit jackets, all of that. Just being able to be comfortable, because it's not representative of the work product that people are providing.
And when you're comfortable, you can be your most brilliant self, right?
I agree with the heels. I had been using flats and tennis shoes for a long time. So definitely, I still like my heels, but they don't have to be every day. But I also think that what I have done that has worked on my end is I've downloaded the Calm app. And that has helped me start my day, just to again, knowing that things get a little crazy during the day and there's just a lot, and sometimes some days do feel overwhelming. I hope that that's something that sticks around, where you try to calm yourself before the day starts. And that's one of the suggestions I'll leave here with the group that has helped me stay sane in this crazy reality of pandemic.
I'm taking notes here on what both of you are saying. This is all great. And, who here is wearing slippers? That's my raise your hand if you're. So my shift, I think, this year is me becoming more intentional about the things that I do work-wise, what I value, what I say no to, and recognizing that I was having this conversation with somebody actually just yesterday, somebody who's making a choice about, staying in a job or not, and kind of the guilt associated with either path, or just the stress. It's a difficult decision. And one idea we're bouncing around is that saying no to one thing allows you to say yes to something else.
Mhm.
So that's, it's not just closing a door, it's creating opportunity for other things. And so from, myself, I think I've been just more conscious and more mindful. It's the opposite. Abundance, I have so much, what do I do with this? It's in a scarcity economy, like I have so little time right now, what is important? And then I think if I import that to the post-pandemic era, still using that approach, I think that will make me be more, I don't know if the right word is efficient, but just more
intentional about what you're doing, right? And more careful about what you're focusing your effort on.
Right.
I'm afraid it's time for us to close, but before we do that, since our lead community is one that likes to take action, we like to give them options and opportunities for action. And so we always ask our guests, what is one thing that our guests would have us do when we leave this webinar? So we're going to start with you, Ms. Garcia. Tell us what you want us to do.
There's a couple things. Number one is be more compassionate with yourself. Be compassionate with others, and continue to speak up for what your needs are. I think one of the things that sometimes as women is we're afraid to speak up what we need. And that's what's going to make a more equitable workplace for you, is if you talk about what needs you have for you and your family.
Like that, speaking up for yourself is going to help others as well. Yeah. Dr. Kimani.
It's a powerful question. I'm gonna push even further and ask for people who are leading organizations to do better around paternity leave, not just focus on the maternity leave, but really recognize the importance of fathers needing to be at home for a longer period of time with their children in those early months. And then take it an even step further. I know several of the women that I have worked with really struggle deeply leaving after 3 months to go back into the workforce because they cannot afford to take that pay cut when it goes down to like the 50% or 60%. I know a lot of these larger organizations have a lot more money that they could put into that to support their employees, because the reality is, and I'm not quoting any studies, but I would argue a lot of the women that are leaving the workforce is because of that very short period of time, not having that support from the organization and needing additional money. So if you can have a full paycheck while you are also at home, being with your child, nurturing your child, both the mothers and the fathers, or 2 mothers at home or 2 fathers at home or whatever, give them what they need and support that. Because if you have a whole person coming to work, then they're going to be more motivated and more productive. Simple as that.
Thank you. Dr. Popescu.
My thought would be to, whatever you do, to not give into inertia where you're having this conversation. So my, recommendation or urge would just be to do something. So you could take any of the steps or suggestions that my 2 co-panelists have said, or look at that list I provided, doThisNow.us. And my recommendation would be choose one, the one that speaks to you, whatever makes sense to you, where you think you can make an impact, whatever you think you're most likely to connect with, and make a plan. Just right after this, take 3 minutes and just write down the first step of what you'd have to do to investigate that or research that or find out how you might implement it. So just translate these ideas into action. That's my action point.
Mm-hmm. Take your inspiration and put it into action right now, right? Before you get pulled in so many other directions. Thank you so much to our guests, Denise Garcia, Roxanne Kimani, and Roxana Popescu, for being with us today. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for sharing all of your expertise and wisdom with us. To all of you who joined by Zoom and the 10 News live stream, thank you for being with us as well. And I wish you all well, and all the moms and all the working women out there. We see you. Keep going. We're with you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Kim, thank you.
I love seeing your dog back there.
Oh,